I'll give you the facts the same way I gave them to the response team, because I've had enough time to arrange them clearly in my head. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 29 years old. I was contracted through Meridian Environmental Services to run a solo winter data rotation at the Hayden Ridge Atmospheric Research Station, which sits at roughly 11,000 feet in the San Juan Mountains of southwestern Colorado. My duties were standard: collect precipitation and barometric pressure data, maintain the instrumentation, transmit daily reports to the Denver office. I want to establish one thing before I go any further. I had completed 2 previous rotations at that station, including one alone, without incident of any kind. What I am about to describe did not happen to someone who startled easily or who had a history of reporting anomalies. The station itself is a single structure compound, 3 prefabricated modules connected by short interior corridors. A main hab unit containing the kitchen and sleeping quarters, a data lab where most of the instrument monitoring happens, and an equipment bay for the snowmobiles, fuel, and supply reserves. A previous contractor had installed 12 security cameras 4 or 5 years before my rotation, following a break-in at the equipment bay, and those cameras fed to a monitor array in the data lab displaying all 12 feeds simultaneously. Part of my daily routine was checking those feeds at the start of each shift, camera by camera, exterior to interior, logging any irregularities, a process that normally took 90 seconds and was completely routine. My rotation was scheduled for 8 weeks. My partner, who was supposed to share the assignment, was medevaced out before it began with an emergency appendectomy, and I was alone from day one. Camera 7 covers the north face of the compound and approximately 30 yards of the ridge beyond it. On day 11, a little past 2 in the morning, I was awake because the wind had come up hard enough to rattle the window seals on the main hab, and I went to the data lab to check the anemometer readings. I sat down at the monitor array out of habit and scanned through the feeds, and on camera 7, at the very edge of the night vision frame, there was a figure standing on the ridge. It was tall, thin, and completely motionless, facing the station, positioned at almost exactly the boundary of what the camera could resolve, as if it knew the range of the lens. My first thought was that a hiker had gotten lost in the storm and walked up the service road, because that was the only explanation I could construct that made any sense, and I held on to it. I geared up and went outside, heavy boots, the orange insulated jacket, headlamp strapped on, gloves. The outside temperature was -14. My breath turned to frost the moment I stepped through the equipment bay door. I went around to the north side of the compound and swept the ridge with my headlamp, walking out far enough that I was standing well inside the camera's field of view. The ridge was empty. No figure, no tracks in the snow except the ones I had just made walking out there. When I came back inside and checked camera 7, the feed showed the empty ridge and my own fresh tracks leading back to the door, and the figure was gone, and I logged it as a probable lens artifact and told myself the cold was causing condensation or compression issues in the image sensor. I actually believed that for 3 more days.
Day 14. Camera 4. The interior corridor connecting the data lab to the main hab showed the figure standing inside the building. I was in the equipment bay when I glanced at the secondary monitor there, which mirrors the full camera array, and I saw it at the far end of the corridor, near the data lab door, standing the way it had stood on the ridge, completely still, facing the camera. I moved from the equipment bay through the north connector to the corridor entrance in under 30 seconds. The corridor was empty. I checked every room in the compound. The data lab, the main hab, the sleeping quarters, the storage closet, opening every door, checking behind everything large enough to conceal a person. I was alone. The station was locked from the inside, and when I went back and looked at the secondary monitor, the corridor feed showed nothing, as if whatever the camera had recorded had already decided it was done being seen for that night. That night, I pulled the full archive from the camera system and went back through the footage starting from before my arrival. I found the figure on camera 9, the south exterior feed, on day 3 of my rotation, standing near the fuel tank enclosure. That date matters because on day 3, I had walked past that enclosure to check the instrument mast, close enough that I would have seen a person standing there if any person had been standing there. I found it again on day 7 on camera 11, the east exterior feed, where it appeared for approximately 4 seconds before stepping out of frame. I found it in 3 other instances across the first 2 weeks, always at the periphery of the frame, always facing the station. It had been there the entire time, invisible to me in person, visible only in the monitors. And when I finished reviewing the footage, I sat at the array for a long time before I wrote anything in the log. By day 17, the figure was appearing on multiple feeds within the same monitoring window. I would run through the camera check and find it on 2 or 3 screens simultaneously, in locations I had just left or was about to enter, as if it were tracking my route through the compound from some position just outside the reach of physical space. I started running tests. I would decide to walk to the equipment bay, then reverse course and go to the main hub instead. And when I checked the relevant feeds afterward, the figure had appeared in the location I originally planned to go, not the one I actually went to. It seemed to know my intentions before I acted on them, and I cannot explain how that is possible, and I've stopped trying to. What I know is that by day 17, I had stopped sleeping in regular intervals and was spending most of my time at the monitor array, watching where it went. By day 20, it was no longer keeping to the edge of the frame. Camera 3, covering the exterior of the equipment bay door, showed the figure standing directly in front of the lens, close enough that I could see the shape of a face. The features were human in proportion, but wrong in expression, a stillness that no living person's face holds for any length of time, a complete blankness, and eyes that registered as open but felt somehow unoccupied. I am not someone who uses language like that casually, and I am not telling you this for effect. I am telling you that looking at that face on the monitor was the first time in my adult life I experienced genuine, uncontrolled fear. I moved camera 3's feed to the bottom corner of the array where I couldn't see it without making a deliberate choice to look. Day 22. A storm had been building for 2 days and was now fully overhead. Beginning around 11 at night, the camera feeds started dropping to static, one at a time, starting with the exterior cameras and working inward. Camera 12, static. Camera 10, static. Then the south exterior feeds, then the east. Each screen didn't flicker or surge. It just transitioned from an image to gray noise, cleanly, the way a channel cuts. And I kept telling myself it was the storm because in any normal circumstance, that is exactly what it would have been. By midnight, I was down to 4 active feeds, and I had stopped logging anything and was just sitting at the array, watching the screens go dark. The 2 that finally remained were camera 4, the interior corridor, and camera 8, which covers the data lab, the room I was sitting in. Camera 4 showed the corridor. It was empty. I checked it twice and held my breath, and it was empty, and I felt something close to relief. Then I looked at camera 8. That camera is mounted in the upper corner of the data, a lab and angled wide to cover the full room. The monitor array, the desk, the chair I was sitting in. In the feed, I could see the back of my own head and my shoulders, which was disorienting for a moment, the way it always is to see yourself from the outside. Behind my chair, standing close enough that if it had been physically present, I would have felt its breath on the back of my neck. The figure was there. I turned around. The room was empty, nothing behind the chair, nothing anywhere in the room. When I turned back to the monitor, the figure was still there on camera 8, and it was slowly raising its head to look directly up into the camera lens, and its eyes were open and they were looking at me.
I don't remember grabbing my jacket or the snowmobile key. The Meridian response team told me later that when they reached the station 4 days after I left, the equipment bay door had been hanging open long enough for significant snow to accumulate on the interior floor, and that my data log for the rotation ended abruptly on day 22 with no closing entry. My snowmobile was found 3 miles down the service road where I had abandoned it when the fuel ran low, and I walked the remaining 9 miles to the highway in conditions that the emergency room physician described as serious exposure. When the response team debriefed me, one of the technicians asked if I had thought about just unplugging the cameras. I had no answer for him. It genuinely had not occurred to me that the cameras were something I could turn off. The station was inspected by a Meridian technical crew following my recovery. They reported no faults in the camera hardware, no image artifacts that would account for what I had logged, and no evidence of unauthorized entry into the compound at any point during my rotation. The archived footage from my time there was, I was told, corrupted beyond recovery, a file system error consistent with an unclean shutdown. I have requested the partial salvage data twice and have not received a response. What I keep coming back to is this camera 8 was mounted in the upper corner of the room, angled to cover everything. And in the feed, the figure was looking up at the lens, not at me, not at the room, but at the camera specifically, at the exact location of the camera in the ceiling. It knew where each camera was. It had always known precisely where to be in order to be seen.